Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this year's MCBK Mobilizing Computable Biomedical Knowledge Global Meeting. It's 6 a.m. in Western North America, 9 a.m. in Eastern North America, 10 in Brazil and Argentina, 2 p.m. in the UK, and 3 p.m. in Central Europe, and 4 p.m. in Saudi Arabia and much of the Middle East. In those places, the sun is shining, and in much of the rest of the world, it is not daylight. It's 9 p.m. in China and 11 p.m. in Eastern Australia, for example. And all of this timing of the global meeting will be explained as this session moves along. I'm Chuck Friedman. I'm one of the 3 co-chairs of this global MCBK meeting, and my 2 other co-chairs will be introducing themselves in just a moment. I'm delighted to report that over 500 people have registered for this meeting, but they will be joining at various times, including a session later today that begins at 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern time. And we'll be talking, as I said, about all of this mechanics of the meeting in just a moment. I'll also point out that these 500 people who have registered represent, at last count, 41 nations. So we're delighted with the global representation of the participants in this meeting. Now let's give our co-chairs a chance to introduce themselves. First, speaking to us from Australia is Dr. Wendy Chapman.
Hello, I'm Wendy Chapman. I direct the Center for Digital Transformation of Health at the University of Melbourne in Melbourne, Australia.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Philip Scott. I'm the co-chair of the MCBK UK group, and I'm a programme director at the University of Wales, Trinity St David.
And I'm Chuck Friedman. I am the chair of the Department of Learning Health Sciences at the University of Michigan in the USA. So we'll return to the slides now. It's the same time just about that it was before. Let's now get started with the proceedings of the meeting. As I mentioned, this is the 5th annual MCBK meeting, but it is the first manifestly global meeting. And as I also said, we're delighted with the level of participation we are anticipating. It's a 2-day meeting, and it has timing of the sessions designed to accommodate almost everyone everywhere in the world, and we'll give you more details about this in a little bit. Each of the sessions will be 4 hours in duration, so this session, which began at 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, will conclude at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Now, to help the sessions tie together, our wonderful colleagues here at Russell Video in Michigan are going to post recordings of each session, beginning with this session, very soon after it ends. So sometime soon after the 1 p.m. Eastern Time conclusion of this session, a recording of the entire session, except for the breakout groups, will be available. I'll also point out that you're currently on an IBM meeting platform, which has a lot of nice features to it, but does not accommodate a lot of interactivity with the participants. So for the breakout discussions, we will be moving to the Zoom platform. And again, we'll explain more about this later. This introductory presentation will have 3 parts. To begin, we're going to talk about why I think we are all here, and that is around the imperative, and we'll explain why we believe it is an imperative for fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and trusted computable knowledge. We'll then move to a very brief history for those of you who are not familiar with it, of the MCBK movement to mobilize computable biomedical knowledge. And then we will give you an overview of this meeting that will spell out in more detail the mechanics of how this global meeting operating on many hours of the clock will unfold. So Philip, I'll now turn this over to you.
Thanks, Chuck. So why are we here then? Well, we're here to talk about better health for everyone in the world, a pretty ambitious agenda. And we're quoting here from Jeremy Braithwaite's very well-known paper giving the 60-30-10 numbers about healthcare. 60% of care on average is in line with evidence or consensus-based guidelines. 30% is some kind of waste or low value, and 10% is actually harmful. And these are not new or temporary figures. These are numbers that have been persisting in various studies over many years, 3 decades. So why does MCBK have a role in the solution to this problem? Let's move on. So what's the problem we want to solve? Well, when we're thinking about computable biomedical knowledge, we're often thinking about decision support. And that's not just frontline clinical decision support in delivery of healthcare. It's also decisions in research, decisions about public health, and decisions in education. But just thinking about some of the drivers for change, well, we have particularly in the clinical sphere, the fact that so often guidelines are not adhered to, as we saw from Jeremy Braithwaite's quotation. In the nature of the workforce, whether that's educational, in the research workforce or the clinical workforce, that is changing. There's a push from technology, and that's linked to patient and public expectations, also driving change. In the healthcare sphere, we think about the sheer volume of data that has to be coped with, coming in from so many different dimensions. So we're addressing a very multifaceted and complex problem here. So this meeting is primarily about knowledge, only secondarily about data, and that's an important distinction that MCBK needs to make. So when we talk about knowledge, we're talking about the result of an analytical and deliberative process that has significance for an identified community. And to counter one of the common but slightly misleading phrases we hear in healthcare, data doesn't save lives. It's knowledge that can save lives. So what do we mean then? So examples of biomedical knowledge. And this is a spectrum. It goes from knowledge which is primarily analytical to that which is primarily deliberative. So we're thinking about things like predictive, explanatory models, computable phenotypes, causal or propositional networks, best practice guidelines, decision trees, even policies, a very broad spectrum. And of course that knowledge can be represented in many ways, and we're used to the human readable representation of knowledge in words, in pictures, or in numbers, equations, and that produces papers that end up in physical or electronic libraries. But we're talking here about computable knowledge, that which is machine implementable, so in some way the knowledge becomes literally computable, and that is what we see as the libraries of the future. And this is vital to the learning health system concept. So the improvement cycle of a learning health system is based around a health problem of interest for that community of practice. And within that, there are the problem domains of healthcare, public health, research, and education. And we see these 3 cycles of knowledge to performance, performance to data, and data to knowledge. And back to Chuck to take that to the next stage.
Thank you, Philip. So why is knowledge so important to the efficient execution and the ability to execute at scale these improvement cycles that are the key to the learning health system? Well, if you look at 12 o'clock, you see a transition that needs to take place from data to knowledge, where analytics and/or deliberations have created new knowledge that needs to be implemented, over to K to P, which is the actual implementation of that knowledge to change processes and practices and performance. And the cycle can't stop at the top there. Something needs to hold the cycle together, and we believe that knowledge can be thought of as the keystone very appropriately placed at the top that holds the cycle together. The community that operates the learning cycle must represent and persist in some way what they learn. And the way in the modern world that this knowledge is persisted and enabled to be applied at scale is by making it into computable forms instead of just human readable forms. Without the keystone, there's a gap, there's a problem, and it leads, many people believe, including myself, that getting across from new knowledge to application of that knowledge is such a challenge without the ability to make knowledge computable, that it leads to a gap of 17 years, plus or minus, between the discovery of new knowledge that could improve health and healthcare and its widespread use in practice. Computable knowledge will help build this gap, and this takes us to the fundamental MCBK proposition that, as I said before, closing the improvement gap requires this computable knowledge, which we represent here by these clusters of what we call digital knowledge objects. Rarely is one object sufficient to bridge this gap, but clusters of these computable knowledge objects that fill the gap, representing the knowledge in computable form that can be applied at scale. If we have this computable knowledge, we have to be able to curate it, manage it, and disseminate it. And as Philip mentioned earlier, computable knowledge will be part of the collections, we believe, of libraries of the future. And we're not talking here about what largely exists already, that is human readable knowledge in PDFs or other electronic formats. That is still human readable knowledge. What we are talking about are these digital knowledge objects whose payloads consist of executable code. And we believe that the infrastructure that supports improvement at scale will require an infrastructure which we believe will be a major part of the collections of libraries of the future. And that's why we show the public library, which, if you can see it, contains multiple digital knowledge objects as the way of, we represent it as the implementation of the keystone. Now, we do have already in human society an infrastructure to establish fairness of human readable knowledge. We have ways of making human readable knowledge findable. We certainly have ways of making it accessible, and these ways have changed considerably with the digital revolution of the past few decades. We have made ways to make this digital knowledge, this human readable knowledge interoperable, and we have ways of making it reusable. And by and large, this infrastructure for human readable knowledge works pretty well. So we're not talking in this meeting primarily or even at all about infrastructure to establish fairness of human readable knowledge, words that people can read, pictures that people can view, and equations that people can look at and evaluate. We are talking about establishing fairness of computable knowledge. The world does not have a parallel infrastructure to the one that already exists for human readable knowledge, and the world needs that infrastructure to make computable knowledge fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And in addition, and I think this is so important that we need to find a way to add trust to the concept of fairness. We need to make computable knowledge both fair and trusted. And you can think about this dual goal as the goal of MCBK, and those of who are here today, I believe, agree that the world needs to mobilize computable biomedical knowledge and create this infrastructure that makes computable knowledge fair and trusted. So this closes the first part of this introductory talk about the imperative of computable knowledge, fairness, and trust. Now I'll move into a brief history of the movement to mobilize computable biomedical knowledge, or MCBK. This is first and foremost a multi-stakeholder movement. We welcome, and we have welcomed since the movement began in 2017, persons representing many, many disciplines, many backgrounds, many groups, including patients, managers, care providers, informaticians, policy experts, government officials, and many others. And I don't mean to leave anybody out, but the point of multi-stakeholder is all-inclusive. The first meeting of MCBK was an invitational meeting just to see whether, so to speak, there's a there, whether there is a rationale to form a movement to mobilize computable biomedical knowledge, and were people interested in putting some time and effort into making this happen. So this organizing meeting happened in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in the US, where Philip and I physically are right now. Wendy Chapman is in Australia, and what you see in that picture is the famous bell tower of the University of Michigan. The success of that organizing meeting in 2017 led to open in-person meetings that took place in 2018 and 2019. While the organizing meeting was invitational, the opening meeting was open to anyone who wished to attend. And we were delighted that the National Institutes of Health, and specifically the National Library of Medicine, which is functionally one of the institutes of the NIH, was willing and in fact delighted to host those first two in-person meetings, and that they took place in 2018 and 2019. A bit more about the 2018 meeting in a moment, because something very important happened there. Then something else very important happened in 2019 for a variety of reasons. Folks in the UK became very interested in the concept of computable biomedical knowledge, or perhaps putting it a bit more accurately, they had been interested in computable biomedical knowledge for a number of years, but decided to have a meeting of those people sharing that interest. And that meeting, and that very successful meeting, took place in London in 2019. The picture you see is a picture of one of the speakers, who is the late John Fox, who passed away last year, and we miss him very much. If he were still around, he would be here and he would be speaking at this meeting. Jeremy Wyatt, who will be giving our opening keynote in just a few minutes, wrote a beautiful in memoriam document that is published in the journal Learning Health Systems. And the more time goes on and the more we think about the challenges that we face to mobilize computable biomedical knowledge, the more we miss John and everything he would have contributed if he were still with us. Now, something else happened in late 2019 and early 2020, which of course is the coronavirus pandemic. And this led to the 2020 and 2021 MCBK meetings going virtual. And that meeting, those successful meetings, took us to the concept, really inspired by the enthusiasm that we saw in the UK, of taking MCBK to global scale. So this is the first virtual global meeting. I imagine if we continue having global meetings, they will continue to be virtual, and the global nature of this meeting is represented in many ways by the scope of the participants in terms of their nationalities, and also in the fact that the three co-chairs represent three different nations: the US, the UK, and Australia. I mentioned something very important that happened at the first MCBK open meeting in 2018, and this was the creation of the MCBK Manifesto. Indeed, the focus of the 2018 meeting was a consensus process that involved everyone who attended, and actually had components of the process that took place after the 2018 meeting was over to reach a true and meaningful consensus around the wording of this manifesto. This manifesto is accessible from the meeting materials. You can link directly to it from there. I don't expect you to be able to read it unless you have a very, very large screen from this slide, but this is a complete picture of the manifesto, which was intended to be brief, but very pointed in the points that it made. From the manifesto, I will just emphasize what the MCBK vision was. And remember, this is a consensus vision of those who participated in the 2018 meeting. First, mobilizing biomedical knowledge that can support action toward improving human health. And it was followed by the statement that this can and should be done using computable formats that can be shared and integrated with health information systems and applications. And of course, this brings into play the concept of fairness that I discussed before. Second point in the vision is that the MCBK movement needs to efficiently and equitably serve the learning and knowledge needs of all participants, as well as the public good. And it follows from this that we see the imperative of putting MCBK to work, putting computable biomedical knowledge to work to reduce health disparities. MCBK also sought in its vision to ensure that knowledge properly reflects the best and most current evidence and science. You can have computable biomedical knowledge, you can make it fair, but it probably won't be trusted. In fact, it almost certainly won't be trusted if the knowledge that it represents is out of date or invalid or otherwise failing in some important respect. So without the knowledge representing current evidence and science, it really has very limited, in fact, no potential to improve health and healthcare. And the fourth and final component of the MCBK vision was to achieve, through the evolution of an open computable biomedical knowledge ecosystem, the ability to achieve the fairness, the interoperability and reusability and accessibility and findability, for that matter, all four components of the FAIR principles as a ecosystem of computable knowledge plays itself out. So these are the four components of the MCBK vision as determined from the manifesto. So what have we achieved so far? We've been at this for 5 years now, and I think we have achieved a lot. First of all, I think it's safe to say now that there is a community, and this community has come together around the principles expressed in the manifesto, and I think the community has begun to have a sense of itself. Of course, there's room for the community to grow geographically, thus this global meeting, to grow in diversity, more and more stakeholders representing different backgrounds and experiences, need to become part of the community, but the community exists, and it does have a North Star in this manifesto. Interest in this concept has spread around the world, and it's missing an R there, but I think everybody sees what SPEAD is supposed to mean. And it is certainly the case, as exemplified by the many participants in this meeting, that this interest exists, and it exists at global scale. There was a journal called Learning Health Systems published by John Wiley and Sons out of the University of Michigan. I have the honor of being the first editor-in-chief of this journal, and a formal relationship exists between the Learning Health Systems Journal and the MCBK movement. A summary of the meetings are published now annually in the journal, as you see in the next bullet, and the abstracts of the lightning talks that have been presented at previous meetings and the abstracts that will be presented at this meeting all will appear verbatim in the Learning Health Systems Journal. And then there have been some very, very important deliverables from the MCBK efforts so far. There's great interest in metadata for computable biomedical knowledge, and there's an excellent paper in the Learning Health Systems Journal discussing categories of metadata that are candidates to be part of a complete metadata schema that will promote trust and fairness of computable knowledge. Philip and his colleagues in the UK, along with Jeremy Wyatt and many others, have published an excellent white paper called Building a Clinical Sat-Nav for Practitioners and Patients, which is all about the imperative of computable biomedical knowledge. I've just seen the amount of press coverage in the UK that this white paper has received. This is very, very important and an excellent read if you want some further exposition and delineation of what we are presenting in this opening session. And then more recently, a study of repositories for computable biomedical knowledge has appeared in the Learning Health Systems Journal. So there is much to read about, much to learn about what MCBK has achieved so far, and much has been accomplished, but there is much more to do. So now we will close this opening talk with an overview of this meeting, this first global MCBK 2022 meeting. Slide's a little bit hard to read, but the anatomy of the meeting is that it has 2 sessions on each day of the meeting, so 4 sessions in all. We are now in session 1 of the first day of the meeting. It is Tuesday, July 12th in much of the world, and in most of the world that will be participating in this meeting at this time. And you see here some of the times around the world in which this session takes place. Now, the second session of day 1, which will have a similar but structure to the first session of day 1, but with some unique speakers and some unique presentations being made of the abstracts, will take place starting at 7 p.m. U.S., Canada, Eastern Time. The session has been timed so that our colleagues in Australia and Asia and other parts of the world that are 12, 14 hours ahead of us can participate in. So this session, which starts at 7 p.m. U.S. and Canada Eastern Time, will start at 7 a.m. In China on July 13th and 9 a.m. in Australia on July 13th. Now, we very much hope that people in North America, particularly those in North America on Pacific time, will participate in this session. It will have several unique features to it. It will have 2 completely different keynote talks, and it will have a set of completely different abstracts that will be presented as lightning talks and discussed in breakout sessions. So the two sessions on day one are similar in structure, but not redundant with regard to content. On day two, we will begin with day two, session one at 9 a.m. U.S., Canada, Eastern Time, later in the UK and in Europe. This will take place tomorrow on Wednesday, July 13th. And similarly, we will have a session two on July 13th in North America and Europe. But that session will take place on July 14th at 7 a.m. in China and 9 a.m. In Australia. That session, like the session two on day one, will be similar in structure, but largely unique in content. So people who want to take in all four sessions of this meeting will have a very significantly unique experience. Recordings of all of the sessions will be available very soon after they end. I'll say a little more about this in a moment. So you can experience, even during the time that the meeting is live, pieces of the meeting that for any of a variety of reasons you were not able to take in live. This table, which is accessible and actually included in an email that you all received yesterday, is a quick and easy reference in 24-hour time, depicting when the sessions will begin and end, depending upon your location. In other words, what part of the world and what time zone you are in. We apologize to people who are in places not included in this figure. We did not mean to leave anyone out, but we basically, for sake of conciseness, listed the locations where we know, because of the registration, most participants will be. And as you can see from the darker blue under day one, session one, that is where we are now. So the full meeting will have several components to it. We will have 6 unique keynote presentations, followed by discussion, by Q&A, and 4 of these keynotes will take place on day 1, 2 in session 1, 2 in session 2, completely different keynotes. And 2 of these keynotes will take place on day 2, 1 in session 1, 1 in session 2, completely unique keynotes from session to session. We will also have a set of lightning talks, and there will be 20 of these in total. These were peer reviewed from a much larger number of talks that were submitted. 20 were selected for presentation at this meeting. Each speaker, each lightning talk author will speak for 3 minutes. These have been pre-recorded, and they will be run in sequence in a 30-minute session a little bit later today. So there will be 10 lightning talks shown in session 1, the session we're in now today, and there will be 10 other lightning talks shown in session 2, the session a little bit later today. These brief talks shown in sequence, as I said, will be followed by concurrent small group discussions with presenters in separate Zoom rooms. In other words, we will have the presenters of the 10 lightning talks which were shown in sequence, each speaker in their own meeting room, and you will be able to select which meeting room you would like to go to. In other words, which speaker you would like to interact with directly. This will be on Zoom to allow full interaction. Everybody will be able to speak and interact. And this will enable not only participants to go to one of these rooms. If you go to one room and speak to one speaker and the time has not expired, you will easily be able to go to a different Zoom room and meet and speak with another speaker. On day 2, we are going to devote a lot of the time in this meeting to thematic, interactive, what we call huddles. This will also be in breakout groups in separate Zoom rooms, and there will be 11 topics of these breakout groups, of these huddles, and you will be able to select which huddle you wish to participate in, or which huddles you actually can participate in more than one on day 2 of the meeting. And finally, in a closing session, which will take place on day 2, both in session 1 and session 2, on day 2, we will be talking about moving ahead with MCBK, getting your views on where this movement should go and how this could evolve in a more formal sense into a global meeting. So the schedule for today, for this session, day 1, session 1, and here we've just given the times in U.S. Eastern Time. The introduction to the meeting, which we are doing now, is unfolding from 9 a.m. to 9:45 a.m. We will move directly from there to Jeremy Wyatt's first keynote, the first keynote by Jeremy Wyatt, and which will be followed by discussion, a chance for you to ask Jeremy questions. Even though his talk is recorded, Jeremy will be here live for the Q&A. We will then play the 10 lightning talks, 3 minutes each, that are pre-recorded, corresponding to the 10 abstracts that have been of the accepted group that will be featured in this session. And then we're going to do the breakouts where you will be able to go to one or more Zoom rooms to speak directly with the lightning talk presenters. This will be followed by a short break. We will come back at noon Eastern Time for Christy Holmes' keynote, followed by discussion. Christy will be here in person for the discussion. Then finally, last but certainly not least, Doug Van Houweling of the University of Michigan, a very insightful and excellent speaker, will summarize his observations of the meeting as it unfolded today. And we will adjourn at 1 p.m. Eastern Time and resume for day 1, session 2 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with the corresponding times in other parts of the world. So a little bit of technical information. During the keynotes, submit your questions into the Q&A option on the IBM meeting panel as soon as you think of them, and we will queue them up and pretty much ask them in the order in which they were submitted. Don't wait till the end of the talk to submit your questions. As I've mentioned, and just repeating this, we'll be using the IBM platform for plenary sessions and the Zoom platform for the breakout groups. The Zoom platform will enable everybody to see each other and will enable everybody to speak in a fully interactive virtual environment. There will be links to get to the individual Zoom rooms, and you will find them on the IBM video player. We'll give you more direct instructions and more detailed instructions about how to do this when the time comes to break out into the Zoom meetings. And for future reference, below the IBM video player on the video tab, you'll have to use the video tab to see these links. You will see links to the recordings of the live sessions as soon as they have been made available, which will be soon, but not immediately after the sessions end. So this brings the introductory presentation to a close. We very much look forward to what is going to happen over the next 2 days. And let me ask Philip, do you have any comments you wish to add before we move on to the first keynote?
Sure, thanks, Chuck. So great introduction. Amazing to see how far this movement has come so quickly from that opening meeting in 2017 to where we are today with a global community here and participating very actively. We've got a great program for you to listen to and actively participate in. So as Chuck said, let's get those questions coming in. Let's have a great discussion together, and I'm sure it's going to be a great learning opportunity for all of us.
Okay, thank you, Philip.